So to start with, I wanted to get your take on the following. So interest across the developed world seems to be the key issue right now. Today, we've seen Eurozone inflation hit a record 5.1% in January of this year. In the US, there are expectations that the Federal Reserve could raise interest rate when it next meets. Do you think we'll be seeing a rate rise from Christine Lagarde at the ECB tomorrow?
I would regard very unlikely a rate increase in the euro area. And I think the main difference to the US is that in the US, the fiscal stimulus was much more forceful, much larger than in the European Union. And also the Biden stimulus came after the Trump stimulus measures. So altogether, it was a much stronger fiscal support. And, now the economy is adjusting to that. People spending their savings. But at the same time, we see energy price hikes and supply side bottlenecks. But again, I think the differentiating factor between the US and the EU, I think, is relates to fiscal policy, and it's also reflected in inflation rates. In the US, inflation rates is around 8%. In the Eurozone, it's 5%. Both are well above the target, but the US is much more away from that.
So at what point how high do you think inflation would need to go in order for the ECB, at least in your view, to start considering an interest rate hike?
The crucial issue, in my view, is the development of core inflation, which is also now somewhat above 2%, but clearly the large 5% headline inflation is mostly caused by the energy price increases. And I think it's a valid expectations that by the end of this year, this impact will disappear from the inflation indicator. So the crucial issue is how core inflation will go. Now, if you look at, let's say, services or industrial goods in the Eurozone inflation index, it's also going up, a little bit, somewhat over 2%. But not yet at a level which, in my view, would trigger a rate rise. So I think core inflation would need to rise to very substantially in order the ECB to do something. And first of all, the ECB will have to stop asset purchases, and rate rise will come only after that. President Lagarde and the Governing Council already clarified that this will be the order of actions. So the rate hike will only come after asset purchases stopped.
And then talking about energy, perhaps, thinking of geopolitics and potential geopolitical tensions, in the event that, let's say, there were economic sanctions put in place by the West, by the EU, the UK, the US, and Russia, and the Russians were to retaliate by either cutting off completely or decreasing the gas flow, and then we would see a spike in energy prices. How concerning is that for core inflation across the Eurozone? Would you see that kind of issue as a potential external shock factor?
So certainly that would push up headline inflation, and sooner or later higher energy prices might also feed core inflation. But there is certainly a time lag. So I wouldn't think that would immediately lead to also an increase in core inflation. So yes, that's a risk. I'm pretty sure that in Frankfurt, London, but also in other capitals across Europe, many politicians and policymakers are thinking about scenarios and on what to do. But currently, this is just a risk at the moment. Why the current inflation outlook, in my view, would not justify a rate increase tomorrow.
Okay, and then thinking, I'm asking you now to look into a crystal ball, if you like, and try forecasting for the next couple of quarters. Do you foresee in the Eurozone any kind of rate rise at all? Or, as you say, it's more about asset purchases at this time?
This year, I would like it very, very unlikely. So what I could imagine that asset purchases will stop sooner or later. That will have to stop, and maybe hopefully we will get more clarification from the Governing Council tomorrow. What's the plan of the ECB for phasing out asset purchases? And only after that will a rate rise come into question. But I would regard it very, very unlikely that in 2022 we will see a rate rise in the Eurozone.